Is it Jules?
Uh-huh.
Hey, welcome.
Hi.
Oh, how's it going, man?
Good, how you doing?
Fine.
Pretty good. I called in maybe a few years ago. I had just, I guess, become a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
With regards to 9/11 or whatever. And at the time,
there's a conspiracy about 9/11 too? Have you heard about that?
Only every week.
Yeah, I'm sure y'all are familiar with this. But anyway, at the time, y'all were like, well, this show is about, it was, atheism. We're not going to get into politics. And I was like, that's cool, whatever. Thanks for taking my call.
Okay.
But, it just seems like a lot of times conspiracy theories are labeled put on people who interpret information differently from the way that other people might. For example,
And by the way, crazy is a label we put on people who interpret reality different than other people.
Oh, yeah, that's fair enough, most people I know you don't know me, but they consider me a fairly well-adjusted person. It's like when you have conspiracy theories where it's one event perhaps, or one, pivotal event where people might look at it and interpret differently. All of a sudden, how does that affect their entire, I guess, psychology? I mean, most people think I'm rational about everything else, then they disagree with me on 9/11. I guess on that issue, I tend to lose.
I know plenty of people who I would consider rational about all kinds of things, and yet they're religious, which I consider to be completely irrational.
Would you say they're all nuts?
No, and I wouldn't say that conspiracy theory believers are nuts. I mean, some are probably, but I think that an easier explanation is that conspiracy theories are seductive. They give the believer a sense that they alone have a handle on what's going on. They have this incredibly vast answer, this understanding that they're tapped into something that nobody else knows, and that everybody else is a fool, and that kind of feels good, I think.
Well, it's incredibly powerful because one of the things that drives us is this overwhelming desire to gain understanding, to come to grips with what's actually going on, to not be surrounded by mysteries. And this applies to where did everything come from, where did we come from, what is consciousness, blah, blah, blah. And when we find something like, for example, the Kennedy assassination or 9/11, and there are unanswered questions, there are explanations that are not completely satisfying, and so we look and we find this compelling and interesting story that's made up from bits and pieces of information that appears to give a much better answer, and if we chuck critical thinking out the window, we can not only accept that answer but be satisfied that we've accepted the correct answer.
Well, earlier y'all made the statement that conspiracy theorists, they don't present evidence of their own. They just simply point out that, perhaps the government or whoever maybe is withholding evidence or whatever. So the fact of the matter is, like, for example, people say there was no plane that hit the Pentagon or whatever.
Do you say that?
Do I? I have seen no evidence that there was. I mean, there's a whole...
You see no evidence that there was a plane at all?
Well, there's no plane
the
part.
Pentagon.
There's no engine or wings or evidence that any of those things.
So the big hole in the engine that they pulled out of there, and the reporter who was standing there, who's gone on repeatedly to say, yes, I saw it and it was a plane.
Right. But the thing is, the government could put all that to rest. There's got to be hundreds of cameras that caught the impact. I mean, it's the Pentagon. It's secure. And honestly, releasing a couple of them, what harm would that do? That wouldn't hurt our national security.
Okay, but what you're doing is using an absence of evidence to support your suspicion. You don't have any evidence. You don't have any evidence to contradict the official story. You're just saying there must be evidence out there that they're not releasing, and since I haven't seen it, I'm not going to accept their story.
Well, I'm not saying there must. I mean, you just
said there must be hundreds of cameras.
Okay, well, you don't think that there are more than one?
I think there were probably several.
But why wouldn't they just? I mean, if these conspiracy theories are, why don't they just blow them out the water and put an end to it?
Because they're irrelevant, and all of the peer-reviewed science goes to refute them. There's no peer-reviewed science.
I wouldn't necessarily say that.
I know you wouldn't.
Another thing that I guess that.
I'm just saying, I think there's a misconception that these conspiracy theories are taken seriously and that there's something that the government needs to squelch at this point.
Have you seen the History Channel? They have a special debunking 9/11 conspiracies.
Yes.
And and that one's great. They go through the conspiracies and they get an expert on to say, listen, conspiracy theorists say when there's smoke there's a fire, but come on, that's absurd. All the refutation they do is aimed at, I guess, the psychological condition of conspiracy theories as opposed to presenting.
Right, but I mean, let me ask you this. This was produced by the Discovery Channel and not the government. So the question is, are the people who work at the Discovery Channel part of the conspiracy, or are they being paid to perpetuate the conspiracy?
They might actually genuinely believe that conspiracy theorists are nuts. I mean, but they present... refuting something means...
No. Stop. Because here's where you've gone way wrong. And you've done it twice now. You're saying that there's a responsibility to refute your conspiracy claim, and the fact that they haven't done it, they haven't completely refuted the story that you believe, is a problem. No, sorry, that's not the way science and investigation works. If you have a claim, you have to present evidence that supports your claim. Actual evidence that supports your claim, not the absence of evidence and not somebody else's, or a flaw or something wrong in somebody else's. And you don't get to just present your claim and say, this stands until you can refute me. That's not the way knowledge works.
I understand what you're saying. I guess what I'm saying is that the government's story never made a lot of sense to me. They never really did.
Why do you call it the government's story?
The story that they told, because they did have an obligation.
It's not just the government story, it's also the Discovery Channel story.
It's also the story of every peer-reviewed scientific study on the events.
It's also the story of the people who were families of the people on the planes. It's
were
the
paid off.
They were all paid off.
Prove that. That's a claim by you that is refuting actual evidence in stand, and you're making this claim.
Let me put a hypothetical.
The families who accepted the government settlement made an agreement to never sue for any reason. I mean, that was part of the...
Let me put a hypothetical to you for a second. Your son has just been killed, and the government contacts you and says, yeah, your suspicions are true, but we're going to pay you a lot of money never to talk about it. How much money would that take?
No, I'm not saying that the government admitted that there's suspicion. I'm saying the government, for everyone, there are a few people who didn't take the payoff, but the ones that... But anyway, I shouldn't call it a payoff. Who accepted the settlement, the wrongful death or whatever, to agree not to sue the government.
Okay, how much money do you have to receive if you're in that position to say, yeah, okay, I'm never going to talk about this?
Now, besides that, you just said that they accepted a wrongful death settlement and agreed not to sue the government. So what? That's standard. That's
not proof of a conspiracy.
But that doesn't stop them from
No, it's not proof of a conspiracy. That happens all the time for everything. You accept... Stop. You accept a settlement in lieu of agreeing not to sue them. That's what the settlement is. It has nothing to do with conspiracy. If you slip and fall at a supermarket and they offer you a settlement, it's a settlement paying you, compensating you for the damage, and you agree not to sue them.
Well, you were using the fact that the families haven't been more vocal about a conspiracy as evidence that obviously one didn't occur.
No, I'm saying that first of all, agreeing not to sue the government doesn't prevent them from talking about a conspiracy at all, so da-dump-dump. And second, what evidence would the family members of the people who died have that there is a conspiracy?
What evidence would anyone outside of the government have or possess? Like, what access or means do conspiracy theorists have to go look over the government's shoulder? And I mean, that's not... Obviously,
you're making a huge argument from ignorance. We can't possibly know what went on, so my wacky conspiracy theory must be just as reliable, just as reasonable as
I never
the official
suggested any wacky conspiracy theory.
You've done nothing but that. You haven't touched on the whole story, but you made claims about payoffs and then backed off of that. You've made claims about that some people they need to be refuting the version you accept. And that's not the case. I'm going to make the claim that there's no such thing as gravity. Angels just pull our feet down to the ground. And that seems just as reasonable as any other explanation. And you can't provide any evidence to refute it. Therefore, ta-da, I win.
I don't really recall that occurring, but then again, I am a conspiracy theorist and what have you. Well, let me ask you something about Building 7. I don't want to, obviously we can't spend the whole time on specifics, but why can't we talk to the people who knew the buildings were going to collapse? The government has spent money paying engineers to do simulations, trying to figure out, the cause of the collapse. And I'm thinking, why not just talk to the people who knew that they were going to collapse? That's just common sense. If you would talk to the guys, you say, hey, well how did you know?
People?
It was just...
Which people are you talking about?
Rudy Giuliani testifies in the 9/11 Commission report that he was told when he was in Building 7 that both the towers were about to collapse, and then and they don't name these people.
Because they had been burning for a long time, and there was like dust coming out of them.
Right. So why didn't the people inside, the firefighters, realize that this was about to occur? And then they go and talk. They tell some an EMS
there nobody
person
in Building 7?
No, they're in Building 7 at this time, and they realize that both the towers are going to collapse. Although it seemed to take everyone inside and people observing, I guess, on TV by surprise, but they seemed to know about it. And then when Building 7 collapsed, that building wasn't hit by any planes or anything, and the guys told them that they said, get out, this building's about to come down or whatever. And I'm like, well, why can't we talk? Why wouldn't you testify as to what you saw, what evidence you knew? This is very controversial in the sense that scientists have been claiming that they're going to come up with an explanation for why Building 7 collapsed, but they never have.
Here's what you've done. You've taken bits and pieces of factual information and strung them together in a largely incoherent story that makes no sense and is predicated on the idea that, gosh, we don't know this, and why didn't they do this, and what about this, and what about this, and ooh, there's so many what-ifs that it must be a conspiracy. That's utter nonsense.
Right. For instance, I haven't heard a really useful explanation coming out of conspiracy theorists yet about why the government actually would decide to collapse Building 7. It couldn't have been part of the let's go kill 3,000 people because as far as I heard, nobody actually died from Building 7.
No, they all got out. They told them to get out. It's about to come down.
Right, so it couldn't have been part of this idea of let's kill a whole bunch of Americans, right?
Have you seen it collapse? Building 7?
So what I'm asking is, what was the motivation for blowing up Building 7? Just, I don't think that blowing up the Twin Towers and a whole bunch of people in planes
there was evidence inside that it was a control station for the entire controlled demolition. Now
I see. So nobody in Building 7 who worked there, this was an office building, nobody ever noticed over the months or years that it took to set this thing up, hey, there's a big honkin' control, there's a big honkin' demolition station in
Not only that, if this was the control center, wouldn't it make more sense to blow the building up and kill the people who were in World Trade Center 7 just in case they saw something, but instead we're going to warn them and make sure they get out okay?
See, you're asking me. I would have to have been there.
Yeah, you would actually have to have a cohesive theory. That's the point. You'd actually have to have a cohesive theory that presents a story that actually answers questions and is backed by evidence, and that's not what the conspiracy theorists have.
I know you probably don't have time for this, but I would recommend, if you ever do, you should read The New Pearl Harbor, because the guy that writes it, he's a philosopher, and I guess he does the most rational or coherent job I've ever heard of, I guess, laying out the conspiracy theories. Because for me to sit here on the phone in 10 minutes and, put it linearly for a year or whatever.
Considering I've watched about 4 films and read about 15 websites on both sides of all this, I doubt that there's anything new in the new Pearl Harbor. And by the way, if there was, we'd all freaking know about it. It would be front page news. If there was any reason... Stop. Yes, it would. If there was any reasonable, cohesive story backed by evidence that confirmed a conspiracy, it would be front page news.
Unless you think that everybody in every media organization is part of the conspiracy. Like,
you don't
everybody.
believe that the government ever, like, covers things up and that maybe it comes out later, that they denied, and later it comes out that maybe they covered up, like the Gulf of Tonkin or anything like that?
Sure.